Good morning to EVA and the Beehive only. My good sis B, aka the greatest artist of all time. And for some crazy reason, that's a controversial statement. Find out in the comments if you don't agree. I honestly don't care. Yeah, decided to bless the national holiday just 4 days out from election day. I'm feeling pretty festive. How about you, EVA?
I also am feeling festive, tried to take the day off to celebrate this national holiday, but apparently it's not recognized by the federal government. So
It is not.
here we are. Here we are.
I'm just glad we have some new gear to wear to the polls on Tuesday. I'm really thankful.
Yes, yes, yes. So thankful for that. And also, my wallet isn't thanking me as much this morning. But good morning, everybody. My name is EVA.
Good morning, I'm Renee. Welcome to Signals in the Noise, daily insights into trends in Florida's narrative landscape. Signals in the Noise takes a look at news articles, social media content, and other platforms to identify conversations, messages, and stories that reinforce the ideas, beliefs, and values that we interact with every day.
Yeah, and this allows us to identify the shape and color of how meaning is being made in the landscape in which we're all organizing and communicating. This is what we call monitoring the narrative weather, and we are your resident meteorologists tracking everything.
Mhm. Each morning, we'll take you through the latest, where we cover stories of importance. Then we'll move to hot takes, where we look at viral content, and we'll wrap things up with On the Radar, a segment where we talk about real time stories that we're tracking. With that, let's get right into our first segment, the latest.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Get into it.
One of the top trending stories comes out of Duval County, where senior judge Brent Shore was exposed after donating to the Trump campaign 12 times since 2016, breaking judicial law. According to USA Today, he also donated to the RNC.
Okay, EVA, that's the same guy who had Trump signs all over his yard and blamed his wife, right?
Yeah.
Oh, God. The judicial law stopping him from making political donations makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, that's definitely him, Renee. Judge Shore was the head of the vote counting board and was in charge of efforts to count mail-in ballots in Duval County, in addition to double checking any ballots that may have gotten flagged for rejection by voting machines. All very important jobs.
Mhm.
In the time since we prepped this briefing, though, we got wind that Judge Shore resigned after facing pressure from incoming state representative Angie Nixon, who serves as vice chair of the Duval County Democrats, Representative Anna Eskamani, a call from the Northside Coalition, and pressure from New Florida Majority. Everybody was on this story.
You love to see it.
Mhm.
Life comes at you fast, doesn't it?
Oh my
This was a
gosh. Yes.
this was a pretty quick turnaround, and while we don't always get as many wins as quickly, we should definitely celebrate this as a victory.
Mhm.
His resignation is a testament to the power of coalitions, influencers, and progressive politicians moving fast-paced messages and stories around election security and voter protection. Oh, you love to see it. The
Mhm.
news about Judge Shore is not the first controversy out of Duval County. They have definitely been trying to remove their mask mandate in the middle of a pandemic. More on that later.
It's a pandemic. I don't understand.
I don't get it, but their canvassing board also came under fire last week, forbidding cameras during its meetings, limiting the number of spectators, and choosing which parts of their public meetings to live stream. Some of these moves, despite new regulations due to the pandemic, could go against Florida's Sunshine Law, and their lack of transparency could delay Florida's vote count on and after Election Day.
Honestly, all of this sounds super suspicious. Also, Renee, don't you find it interesting that Trump and the GOP are out here pushing blatantly false, and again,
Oh, God.
blatantly false stories about voter fraud, encouraging militias to bring guns to the polls to protect the vote, as they say, all the while they had a longtime committed supporter in charge of counting said votes?
God. Interesting is one word for it. And this is where we start to sound like a broken record, a scratched CD, a damaged 8 track. We don't want to forget the boomers here, okay? Creating and sharing compelling stories, making and placing them over and over, all adds up to the narrative that we need to win. Whether they're small wins that affect one county or big wins that affect millions of people across the state, doubling down on our tactics will ensure that our side continues winning.
For sure. And since we're all talking about Duval County, a story by the Associated Press reports that it and other North Florida counties are emerging as new political battleground areas, and Black voters could be the deciding factor on who wins Florida in next week's election. Jacksonville, for example, is home to nearly 1 million Floridians, and about one-third of them are Black. While campaigns have traditionally focused on population centers further south, like Miami, Orlando, and Tampa, both parties can no longer afford to ignore the state's northern reaches if they want to secure a win.
Yep. And door knocking and canvassing efforts should be taken as indicators of the power the Black community holds. As an example, the Black PAC is sending more than 150 people to door knock in Black communities in Jacksonville, as well as GOTV Text Party that's taking place tomorrow. It isn't
Ooh.
coincidental that the Trump campaign opened one of their offices in one of the city's predominantly Black neighborhoods. Like we mentioned in yesterday's episode, 9% of the over 67 million votes casted so far in the election nationwide are from Black voters. So for grassroots organizers, the work put towards GOTV efforts like Souls to the Polls, digital campaigns under the hashtag Black Votes Matter and Black Voters Matter, and general voting educational material is definitely working.
It definitely is. And a text party sounds very fun. It's refreshing to hear the power our people have echoed in mainstream national outlets, isn't it, Renee? It's always a feel good
Mhm.
story.
Definitely a feel good story. With that, let's move into our next segment, Hot Takes.
In our last Signals in the Noise briefing, we mentioned we could be tracking the role of rural voters in Florida, as well as military service people both in state and abroad. Well, we've got some updates for y'all.
The Dixiecrats, a Southern term for lifelong Democrats who vote Republican, can be found in what they call the real Florida, or Okeechobee, Highlands, and Glades. Some Dix-
Okeechobee.
Some Dixiecrats in these three counties have switched their party affiliation from Democrat to Republican because they say that the Republican Party encapsulates their values as small town rural conservatives, namely the party's anti choice, pro military, and prioritization of law and order, disguised as support for law enforcement.
Yeah, and despite these three counties having high poverty rates, they have not been touched by COVID as much as other counties in Florida, which is why we're not seeing more peel off of the way that we have seen in rural voters across the South, especially those who chalk up their refusal to support the president's second term because of his failure to control the spread of the coronavirus. Sometimes lived experiences can shift ideological beliefs.
For sure, for sure. However, conversations about COVID mismanagement does come up with Dixiecrats who've remained registered Democrats. Citing Christian values, these Dixiecrats have offered to help those impacted by the virus, usually the elderly and people with disabilities. This demonstrates how shared values of community responsibility and caring for our neighbors, which some folks call mutual aid, can sometimes undercut partisan politics.
Yeah, and this is a great reminder to lead with values in our messaging so that way we can connect with audiences on a deeper level and align our visions of what could be.
Yep.
Mhm. In the Palm Beach Post, Dixiecrats who have changed their party affiliation to Republican explain that although they could do without Trump's abrasive nature, they ultimately support his messages of America first, his support of Second Amendment gun rights, his hands-off approach that enables business to flourish, and his investment in agriculture and wastewater infrastructure. According to them, actual registered Democrats, not to be confused with Dixiecrats, mind you, aren't so much tied to the party as they are with what the candidate offers, a common belief we continue to see echoed in conversations between Florida voters during this election season.
Yeah. And while we know 4 days is not enough time to turn voters in Okeechobee, Glades, and Highlands toward progressive politics, we still think that over the long term, there's an opportunity to uplift unbranded content and stories on mutual aid, namely folks in these counties who extended charity towards their neighbors during the pandemic.
Mhm.
It's also important to spread messages about shared values of community responsibility and caring for neighbors and connecting those values to the role of government, who should be caring for its constituents.
For sure. So true. Renee, do you remember when Trump got caught calling US troops suckers and losers?
Oh my God. The many times he's been recorded saying some pretty foul stuff, that was a rough one. And it definitely rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially folks who let everything else Trump has said completely slide.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the top stories about the election are about Trump trying to push a ballot counting policy. So all ballots are counted on election night, even though federal law permits states to count ballots for troops stationed outside the US, as well as diplomats and Americans living abroad, as long as they've been postmarked by election day.
Yeah, and even though we know that the election isn't actually called the night of, it's mostly the media projecting a winner based on votes casted so far. In
Mhm.
Florida, the cutoff for military service people, diplomats, and citizens living abroad is November 13th. But if Trump has his way, he could disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of people overseas, including tens of thousands who are stationed at the Naval Air Station in Jacksonville or the Southern Command headquarters in Doral. This
Yeah.
is part of the story Trump and his campaign are not telling. But if we're told loud and clear, it could connect to the other ways Trump and his administration have hurt members of the military and their families.
Yeah, it's almost like he forgot that commander in chief is in his job description, but maybe he only cares about including the voices of the military and
Mhm.
vets when it suits him.
That's what it's starting to look like. And any of us would have
Mm.
been fired if we forgot a whole 50% of our jobs. Like, let's be real.
Don't even get me started. Oh, God. He could also be shook that some military service members are just trying to get back at him for his negative comments by voting against him. There could be a story up in there somewhere.
Yeah. And we know and continue to uplift the fact that everyone's vote matters and that every voice counts.
Hmm.
This move to stop counting incoming ballots, regardless of when they've been postmarked, is just another tactic to undermine the elections and democracy at large.
Yeah, that is, unless you're Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who sides with ballot blocking because he claims it, quote, is necessary to avoid the chaos and suspicions of impropriety that can ensure if thousands of absentee ballots flow in after Election Day and potentially flip the results of the election.
Oh, God. How can you flip the results if the election is still happening?
Girl,
Please
I have
make
no
it make
idea.
sense. Make it make sense.
No.
Honestly, none of this is backed up by historical evidence or facts, but it's clear to me that facts don't matter to people who've been engaging in a month-long warfare against democracy.
Yeah, it just sounds like they're trying to change the still counting ballots to any ballot that comes in after we say it's okay until it's the election against the president is fraudulent. And that's a very important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll claim that the deep state intervened, or
Oh,
maybe
Lord.
Mickey Mouse is voting for the Democrats. Honestly, all of this is part of a larger network of stories that are told from different perspectives to advance their larger narrative about a rigged election while they actually put the election in harm's way with faulty motives and partisan judges. That's why we have to continue to create and place stories that point back to our narratives of freedom and democracy for all people.
Yep.
I'm glad I got that off my chest. Now,
Mhm.
let's move on to our last segment on the radar. While the news broke late last night, we're tracking stories and conversations related to Governor DeSantis and accusations that his administration failed to spend $10 million for election security, COVID-19 protection at the polls, and is currently sitting as unbudgeted reserve. This, in addition to the $6 million in CARES Act funds that 19 counties decided not to take advantage of, which could be used to make polling places safer for voters and hire extra people to count mail-in ballots.
Oh, Florida.
Florida,
We're
Florida,
also
Florida.
we're also tracking stories and conversations on Florida Senator Rick Scott, who has inspired backlash against his political ad, where his opponents claim he's using his deceased mother's story to paint himself as a candidate who was for the Affordable Care Act, even though his
Yikes.
track record clearly says otherwise. The scams just never end with this guy. They never end.
Clearly.
As a Floridian who lived under a Rick Scott governorship, I can honestly say that this man is not a friend of sick people or just everyday human beings. I mean, the guy ran a company that committed the largest Medicare fraud in history before he was governor. Trading his dead mom to win political points is the clearest example of the type of character that he has.
He did all that and still became governor. Very, very
Mhm.
interesting.
Mhm.
Renee, you and all our organizing friends in Florida have some weird allies in disliking Scott, though. A website called truthaboutrickscott.us has emerged, which at first glance appears to be a smear campaign against the senator from the far right, using anti-Chinese xenophobic rhetoric and linking to the uber right-wing news, and I say news so loosely here, site, The Daily Caller.
Okay, so in this case, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend.
No.
Let's move on from Skeletor, please. A 2019 story about retired pro golfer Jack Nicklaus has reemerged in relation to Trump and his reelection campaign. We'll be tracking any conversations about Trump's business ties, especially as it relates to criticisms on his habitual cronyism.
Yeah, definition check here for our viewers, and maybe an explanatory comma for some. Cronyism is a practice of awarding jobs and other advantages to friends and trusted colleagues, especially in politics and between politicians and supportive organizations.
Okay, Google Scholar.
You know, I used to be an academic. That's what I do.
Finally, we're tracking conversations related to the Florida Phoenix's story on the state Supreme Court rejecting a late challenge against Amendment 3. This is a win for the 3.6 million Floridians who aren't registered under a political party.
Yeah, that makes up a huge chunk of eligible voters in Florida. Maybe we can see the end of a two-party system in our lifetime after all. Who knows? Since the end of election season is next week, we continue to pay close attention to stories and conversations on the presidential candidates and any last-minute election-related disinformation. Mm-hmm. Well, Renee, I don't know about you, but it's time for me to hop and see if I can find some extra Ivy Park wear before it's all sold out.
Good luck to you, sis. The bots are coming for you.
I guess. I know they are. They're waiting. Well, that's it for us this morning, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to Signals and the Noise. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.
Perfect.